get going here, I want everybody to stand up and hear Siri.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Wow. I wish everybody got so excited to see me. A lot of times people are running away when I'm approaching. Is the feedback? Okay, great. Thank you all for the very kind words and introduction. Thank you for that. That was very, very nice. I don't get to speak to crowds often. I'm usually just in a courtroom, so it's kind of a treat for me to be able to do this and fly out here to Minnesota. I'm just glad this time when I flew into Minnesota, I wasn't asked to brace because the runway was icy as the plane landed. And the last time I came, I was in Arizona and I forgot the weather differential. So it was quite a shock too. Thank you all for coming out on a Sunday. And I was told that in Minnesota, you're facing a little bit of an unprecedented situation in that there are potentially bills that are going to come to the floor to seek to take away your exemption to be able to send your children to school without one or more mandated vaccines. Bad enough there are mandates, which are all illiberal and should all be unconstitutional in and of themselves. You only need to mandate something when it's not safe and effective. You don't need to mandate water or food products. These are all products. We all need them. Nobody needs to mandate us to do them. You only need mandates when you can't persuade people on the merits. That's when you need to use force, coercion, bullying. And that's been the tactic of every government, dictator, bully, thug throughout history. So I understand that you have some very nice elected officials here in your great state who have decided that they know better than you how to parent your children and how to live your lives and what medical decisions you should make. So I'm going to do something a little different today that I've never done before. I put together a little bit of information. Hopefully, I'll try to keep it interesting. That I'm hoping will help in discussions with elected representatives on a policy level when it comes to the products they want to mandate. So you don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of the safety and efficacy, but you'll have an argument for why it doesn't make sense to mandate, let alone get rid of the exemptions for the mandates for the various products that are required for K through 12 in Minnesota. So with that, let's get started. So these are the wonderful folks you just heard from all who are sponsoring the event. And I do recall that very fondly, Wayne, reaching out to you. And Wayne was amazing. He's like, what do you want? List? He goes, what do you want to do with it? I go, fight bad guys. He goes, you got it. That was it. That was it. He said, it's great. It was like 40 pages of Excel spreadsheets. I mean, it was great. And so, these are your local organizations fighting for your rights in Minnesota. And, everybody, I would encourage everybody to support them in any way that you can. So I was asked more generally to speak about, these were the topics I was asked to talk about, my legal work and victories, they've called it, regarding informed consent, vaccine mandates, vaccine exemptions. I'll do the first one in one slide, and then we'll get to the important stuff. My law firm, Siri and Glimstad, we have over 60 folks. One of the partners from the firm here is today, Peter Yost, who does some of great work at the firm. And anybody else here from the firm? Stand up. Anybody? Okay. So, and I would say nearly over 40 of those folks engage in mostly vaccine work, and over 30 of them exclusively vaccine work. I believe we have the largest vaccine practice in the world that doesn't represent pharmaceutical companies. Yeah. And we do vaccine injury work in the Federal Court of Claims. Wayne's written extensively about that. And we also have a vaccine exemption practice, which we do in various areas: work, school, immigration, and military. And then we have at the core a vaccine policy practice, which is most of the work that most folks are familiar with. And that vaccine policy practice is almost all supported by ICANN, Informed Consent Action Network. That's the nonprofit that also supports the Highwire. I see a lot of Highwire shirts out there. That's Del Bigtree is the person who runs the Informed Consent Action Network. And so we do three things generally. We secure rights. For example, we recently had a lawsuit in Mississippi where for the first time since 1979, children are right now back in school with a religious exemption, having not been able to attend school in Mississippi without all mandated vaccines for quite a while. So we're really happy with that decision because it was under the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. The court held that if you're going to give a medical exemption, if there's a secular reason that you can let children in school, then you got to honor a religious reason as well. And just to understand, when we say religion, that doesn't mean church on Sunday. In 1791, when the First Amendment was finally ratified by the states, they didn't understand religion to be something you just did on a Sunday. It was about your convictions. People lived their convictions back then. They did not separate the secular from the religious the way we do today. And so when the First Amendment guaranteed the right to religious freedom, it meant that you could live out your convictions. It's something far broader than we think of. And so if you've got, anyway, parents in Mississippi can now express their convictions and not have the draconian penalty of their children excluded from school for doing so. Another case we brought, for example, is we sued on behalf of members of the Air Force that didn't want COVID-19 vaccine, and we obtained a class-wide injunction preventing the dismissal of over 10,000 members of the Air Force. Brought a case on behalf of the Army, too. We've done other cases, like in Washington, D.C., where they had passed a law that permitted doctors to vaccinate children without their parents knowing and then hide it from them. So we got an injunction against that, and that law is now off the books. We also do public understanding about these products, which is really critical. You want to change laws, you want change not only in the legislative houses, but in the courthouses. You got to change public perception. Gay marriage was never going to be a constitutional right. What everyone thinks about it in the 1800s or in the early 1900s. What changed? Public perception. And in the same way, it's really important that people have an accurate understanding of the products at issue, including being reminded they're just products. Products made by companies, not given at Sinai to Moses. They're not holy. They're not special. They're just like every other product. And in fact, they're so safe. The government did you a favor and made it so you can't sue the pharmaceutical companies for injuries. Isn't that nice? That's how safe they are. Yeah. Anyhow, so the other thing we do is public understanding about the products. So cases like suing the FDA to get all of the documents they relied upon in 108 days to license Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. Right? We sued the FDA to get those documents, make them public. The FDA wanted to hide them for decades until pretty much everybody alive today was no longer here. I don't know if folks are familiar with the vSafe data as another example. In any event, and then we also act as a watchdog. We have over 1,000 FOIA requests with the FDA, CDC, NIH. We send them letters. We attend their meetings. Every single thing that they do around vaccines, we're there. We're there so they know somebody's watching, because really nobody else is. And so we're very fortunate with ICANN support to be able to do that all the time. Not only do we submit, have 1,000 FOIA requests, we have hundreds of appeals, and we sue them regularly, which is why when we send them a letter and we say we're going to sue, they know we're going to sue. So they know we're going to sue them because we do it all the time. So those are the three activities. So I've now covered point one of what I was asked to speak about. Let's get to the meat. All right. So K-12's mandated vaccines in Minnesota. Everybody here in this room that opposes mandates of vaccines, could you please raise your hand? All right, let me do it the other way. I'm sorry. Anybody in this room that does not oppose mandated vaccine, raise your hand. Nobody's going to jump on you. Nobody's going to bully you. We're not going to mandate you. Okay. To not take them. All right. Okay, great. Well, then good. Then let's arm everybody here with some information. I'm hoping that maybe you don't know, maybe you know this all, but maybe you don't know, that you could use and that you should all use to meet with your state legislative representatives. It's been, it's always, in dealing with state legislative reps, the one thing that I always found surprising, and at least initially, I'm no longer surprised by it, that they'll tell you is that nobody bothers to come see them. They're like, yeah, we have constituents. Nobody comes to see us. People don't come to office. When they finally get somebody in their district that calls them and says, hey, I'd like to meet with you about an issue, they're like, great. They want to meet you. They want to hear from you. You can have an outsized impact by actually going and meeting with your state Senate and House representatives. Representatives, that's what they're called? Representatives. And so my goal is to provide you some information now that everybody in this room, you took the time to come around and Sunday listen to me for 2 hours, so it's going to be a lot less painful. You to go for 30 minutes, and you get to do all the talking, and share some information with them. So in Minnesota, here are the vaccines required for school. You could see them up there. They're DTaP, polio, IPV, MMR, Hep B, and varicella, as well as meningococcal for 7th grade. That's not on that list. So 6 shots. 6 shots are what required to attend school in Minnesota. And those 6 shots, you have a personal belief exemption here, I understand, a religious exemption, and I understand that those are potentially on the chopping block. So let's start with, what is the argument for mandates? Who knows? What's that? Yeah, well, there's all kinds of safety things we don't mandate. What do they say about vaccines? Why do we have to mandate them? They want to stop what? Spread. That's the argument. They want to prevent transmission. And they usually say it with a lot more exclamation points than that, right? And as an example, think about heart medicine. 700,000, the #1 killer of Americans every year. 700,000 Americans die a year of heart disease. Do we mandate statins? Do we mandate heart medicine? No. Are people with heart attacks and heart disease crowding our hospitals, filling up our emergency rooms, utilizing our healthcare resources? Yeah, that's why they're there, right? But do we mandate people to exercise, eat better, do all the things that potentially could reduce heart disease? No, we don't. It's intuitively illiberal. It's intuitively rights-crushing to do that. That is the most nanny state thing you could do, is to make people do something because it's good for them. People understand that concept. State doesn't make you do things that are good only for you. That is a core principle of tyranny. It is exactly what this country was a rebellion against. The idea that somebody else, some dictator, some central authority, some king knows better than you. That's why we have individual rights. That while liberty might be dangerous at times, the greater danger is depriving people of it. So, do they all prevent transmission? Let's take a look. And let's I see there's reserved seats here that were empty. Is that for Paul Offit? Who is that for? I have a few questions for him. Okay. Well, if he shows up, let me know. Wayne, you'll help me out? Okay, thank you. Let's start with pertussis. All right. So, pertussis, it's a bacteria, okay? Strange thing happened. They were vaccinating. They started with like 3 doses, and then went to 4, and went to 5, and then went to 6. But it didn't appear like the amount of circulating pertussis in the community was going down. The number of symptomatic cases was going down, but not the amount of circulating pertussis from what they could tell. The vaccine can reduce symptoms for a while, but paradoxically, they didn't understand why was there not what they would look at as you look at the inter-epidemic interval. If there's less circulating pertussis, that interval should get wider, but it wasn't. Staying the same, or it's getting narrower. So the FDA did a study, and they used baboons because they have the closest immune system to human beings to study in. They don't typically infect people purposefully with pertussis. And they took basically 4 groups of baboons. They took what they call naive baboons. These are baboons that never were infected and never vaccinated. Just, as they came out of the womb, they were just nothing. Then acellular pertussis vaccinated baboons was the second group of baboons. This is what they give children 6 doses in childhood today. WP is a type of pertussis vaccine we don't use in the United States for decades, so we're going to ignore that. And then there's convalescent baboons. That means they've had pertussis. No vaccines, had pertussis. Okay? So, no natural immunity, no vaccine immunity. Vaccine immunity, natural immunity. Okay? All right. They then expose them all to pertussis. And then every day, these baboons had a swab shoved up their nose a few times, and then cultured to see if they could culture any pertussis bacteria, right? Because if the vaccine prevents transmission, when they stick the swab up the nose, what should they find? Yeah, just snot. That's it. No pertussis bacteria. But what did they find? Here's what they found. They found for the baboons that had never been vaccinated, never been infected, they were able to culture for almost 30 days in their nasopharynx pertussis bacteria. That's where bacteria is going to spread from. But look at the acellular pertussis vaccinated baboons that had gotten the vaccine we're giving our children. They were actually shedding, they had pertussis bacteria for almost 37 or 8 days, longer, and the same quantities. So assuming this translates to humans, which later studies, and we're going to go through those, confirmed it, who's more likely to spread pertussis? Who said that? Sacrilege. We're going to talk later. Paul Offit's waiting. Yeah, right? Okay. So, wait a second. Hold on. What about the baboons that had pertussis before? What about them? No, that's 0. It's actually 0. 0. They couldn't culture any pertussis, not for a second, out of their nasopharynx. None. Well, here's the. I will tell you, by the way. To me, the most amazing part of the study is not that it was done. What's the most amazing part of the study? It was published. That's right. That's right. That, to me, is the most amazing part of the study, frankly. All right. So, here's even the title. Acellular pertussis vaccines protect against disease, but fail to prevent infection and transmission in a non-human primate model. The FDA even put out a press release that kind of said, and then they got rid of it. I still have a copy, though. Where they're saying, oh, we got a problem, Houston, and they realized that wasn't a good idea. So they got rid of it. But that spurred a whole line of studies and of research and so forth. And this is what is known as a consensus paper, okay? These are considered some of the leading pertussis experts in the world that are listed on this, including Dr. Catherine Edwards, author of the pertussis chapter in Plotkin's vaccine book, and Dr. Tina Tan, who also considers herself a vaccine pertussis expert in the United States and pertussis experts around the world, many of whom are funded by pharmaceutical companies that make pertussis vaccines as well, and as well as the World Association of Infectious Disease and Immunological Disorders, and blah 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 blah. Okay, so after they all flew out to some fancy place on Pharmadime, and they discussed the issue. And here's the paper they ended up releasing out of their own mouths. Quote, acellular pertussis vaccines cannot avoid infection and transmission. Acellular pertussis vaccines do not prevent colonization. Consequently, they do not reduce the circulation of Bordetella pertussis and do not exert any herd immunity effect, end quote. That is now the FDA in baboons. This is now the consensus after looking at all the literature, studying it. there's really no one left to ask on quote unquote the other side other than maybe like somebody on CNN doesn't know what they're talking about. This is actually the reality of pertussis vaccine. I'm sorry? A few years ago, not long. Before I deposed Dr. Edwards about it, not long before, in which I asked her about it. She denied it initially, and then I believe, and then I read it to her, and I think she agreed with me then. So we sent the letter to the CDC, and we said, hey, CDC, can you do us a favor? I feel like the folks here are missing some attention. I'm sorry. We said, hey, CDC, this is a FOIA request. We wanted documents, quote, documents sufficient to reflect that acellular pertussis vaccines, while reducing symptoms for pertussis, do not prevent infection transmission. I think, we and ICANN were curious, what are they going to do with that? Well, they send us back a list of studies. The same 2 studies I just showed you, okay? That's what they sent us. That's all they have. They don't have anything. They know it's a problem. Oh, the other thing, too, my favorite part about this, by the way, is I'll tell you my speculation, is that the reason those studies got, not the FDA one, that one I can't explain, but the pharmaceutical industry one, the reason I think they published that, they were working and they were close on a new pertussis vaccine that was a nasal vaccine, right? Because the pertussis bacteria, it gets on your mucosal surfaces, right? So you need IgA antibodies. The vaccine's injected. It gives you IgG antibodies. This is what they call systemic immunity in blood. It's not creating the type of immunity. It's also got something called, we'll get into it a little later, linked epitope suppression. But the bottom line is I think they were hoping they were going to have a vaccine that does prevent transmission. So they were like, oh yeah, let's talk about how bad the current one is. But then it didn't work out. So anyway, because there was a whole line of peer-reviewed studies trashing the current vaccine, and then it stopped when the other vaccine appeared to fail. Anyhow, so there's a response to that. So then we decided, okay, CDC's got nothing, or they're admitting it. What about the FDA? So then we sent what's a formal petition to the FDA. That's what you're looking at on the screen. So when the, Moderna or Pfizer want to license a vaccine, there's a formal docketing system at the FDA that they use. How does Pfizer say, I would like to license this vaccine? They call up, send an email, telegram? No. There's this formal docket system that they use. To FDA's annoyance and chagrin, we use that same docketing system to make requests of the FDA as well. And since it's a very formal process, they have to respond to our requests in the same manner, unless they also want to stop responding to pharmaceutical companies. Okay, so what did we request? We petitioned the FDA requesting that they amend the package insert for the pertussis vaccine to say it doesn't stop infection transmission. We said to the FDA, there's confusion in the marketplace. People think it does, hence meriting the modification of the package insert. Well, let's see what the FDA said. It's an amazing response. We just got this. You're the first people in the world to see this, actually. I'm literally, you are. I'm not, except for the attorneys in our firm, a few of them. Here's what they say. It's important to note that FDA's licensure standards for vaccines do not require demonstration of the prevention of infection or transmission. You knew that over there. You knew that, right? I'm sorry, you knew that. You knew that. You didn't know that? Oh, okay. Sorry. What about?
They said that about COVID, so
we've done this before. I think we did this for another vaccine. Anyway, so indeed, they say in talking about all the instances we provided them of people misunderstanding about this vaccine not being able to prevent infection transmission, they say, indeed, the pertussis vaccine that the FDA has licensed are for prevention of pertussis disease, not infection with Bordetella pertussis. And then I created this slide about very like 1 a.m. last night, and I left off the good bit. Sorry. But if I had not done that, you get to the rest of this. So, but that's good enough. I mean, who likes that so far? Is that good? All right. But the rest of it goes on to say, what are you talking about? People aren't confused. Nobody's confused about the fact that it doesn't prevent infection transmission. Goes on to say that. ICANN will be releasing this in a legal update over the next few weeks. You'll get to read it with your own eyes. So, so maybe we can call that a teaser. But there it is with the FDA. So let's ask the question. Reducing symptoms while remaining able to transmit makes one more likely to transmit or less likely? The answer's on the board. Of course, it does. By the way, this is one of the things I was talking about earlier. Just figured I'd have it up there for anyone to see it. This is a study that looked at the interepidemic intervals, and this just definitively confirms it. Because if you have less circulating pathogen, the interval between epidemics gets wider. It has not for pertussis. And that's, that's what that quote says. Before I go through this, well, you know what? Let me go. All right, so that's one problem with the pertussis vaccine, and that's bad enough, right? That alone should be bad enough, right? Vaccinated kids, the first time they encounter pertussis, are more likely to potentially spread it. Not less likely, according to at least the Warfel study, right? And what we've read, because they have less symptoms. So, but they're equally as likely to transmit it. So the kid with less symptoms is more or less likely to go to school. The kid who has more symptoms is more likely to stay. Right. That is a second reason, right? In addition to the fact that they're apparently having it in their nasopharynx for a longer period. And that's on the first encounter with pertussis of the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated kid. But there's actually an additional problem, meaning that we could stop there. But why stop there? One more point on this. We won't do all the other vaccines in depth like this. The other ones we'll do quickly. We'll really grind on pertussis, then we'll do the other ones quicker, okay? Linked epitope suppression. Used to be called original antigenic sin, but that sounds really bad, so they changed the name. And what is that? What is that? I didn't do it. The immunologist did it. What that means is this. When your immune system is primed to react to a pathogen a certain way, with a certain antibody repertoire response, the next time it encounters that same pathogen, it has the same antibody repertoire response, even if it's not that great. Okay? Let me make that actually, before I show you this, let me make that specific, because that was very abstract. The pertussis bacteria has about 3,000 antigens. Antigens have epitopes. That's really the part that the antibodies stick to. That's why it's called linked epitope suppression. Those, of the 3,000 antigens on the pertussis bacteria, how many are in the vaccine? Anybody know? Who said 5? You get the prize. It gets 5. That's right. But whoever said 1 is also right, because there are some versions that have 1. But that's not the one we use anymore in the U.S. for the most part. So there are 5. 5 out of 3,000. Okay. Those 5 antigens is what, when you vaccinate a child for pertussis, those are the 5 antigens. When they are actually infected with pertussis bacteria, their body creates a robust immune response to those 5 antigens, okay? And because of this phenomenon known as linked epitope suppression, original antigenic sin, what happens is, what they say is the immune response to those 5 antigens, epitopes, crowds out the immune system's ability to create immunity, effective immunity, to the rest of the antigens. So that creates a form of defective immunity that does not go away. And so these children who are given the pertussis vaccine, based on a number of studies not conducted by me, I'm just a lawyer, what do I know, but by Dr. Cherry at UCLA, who has also received, from my understanding, some pharmaceutical funding. He's the one who published this phenomenon. And because what they did was they did these bench science studies where they would take the antibody, they would take the blood of kids who were pertussis vaccinated, and then they would see what antibodies were they having a robust reaction to. And they were like, oh man, that's not good. They're having a reaction to the 5, but they're not developing antibodies to the rest of it. I can't make this up. One of the suggested solutions was to create another vaccine that has the antibodies to the other 2,995 antigens as a way to fix the problem. Who wants that shot? Okay. Okay, so that is what this phenomenon is. And it is, so here's a, this is Dr. Cherry, and in his article published in the Journal of Pediatric Infectious Disease Society, not censored yet and not retracted, by the way, it says, and he's not, and he would not consider the views of many folks in this room his kin views. Because of linked epitope suppression, all children who were primed by DTaP vaccines will be more susceptible to pertussis throughout their lifetimes, and there is no easy way to decrease this increased lifetime susceptibility. That means these children can become infected with pertussis over and over and over and over, and each time spread it in their nasopharynx because the immunity they have prevents symptoms but doesn't prevent infection and transmission. That is a built-in immune response they now have, potentially for life. How long? Is it years? Is it life? Unclear to me entirely, but seems it goes on for a while. And that, of course, renders the question of vaccinated have less symptoms, but they can be repeatedly infected and transmit, while the naturally immune, more symptoms, but they're immune from being able to transmit. If you've never had the vaccine and you're infected with pertussis bacteria, you are then encounter pertussis bacteria again, your immune responses to every component of the pertussis bacteria. You are not transmitting it. Remember the baboon study? Remember this? Remember these guys right here? Zero. They couldn't culture any pertussis from the nasopharynx if they've had pertussis. So the kids so now we've got a third reason, and that's the final reason, I don't have any more. The third reason for why children who are not vaccinated for pertussis, it is nonsensical to exclude them from school on the argument that you need to reduce transmission of pertussis in schools. If they have pertussis, they have symptoms, more likely. Well, go home. Once they've had it, they don't get it again, at least for years. Done. The vaccinated, infected with pertussis, less symptoms, don't know to stay home necessarily. Also, we know, are likely, based on the Warfel study, to be spreading it for a longer period potentially, and then can be affected again the next month, and the next month, and the next month, constantly going to school. Which is why, when you go back to this study, they're not finding the inter-epidemic intervals are getting wider. Because and in some of the studies actually are showing it gets shorter, which means there's more circulating pertussis bacteria. So, the point is this. Do we exclude children vaccinated for pertussis from school? No. Wait, we got to reduce transmission in school of pertussis. The vaccinated kids are more likely to transmit. Do we kick them out of school? Of course not. It's incredibly illiberal. We should never do that. Ever. We shouldn't do it to the vaccinated or the unvaccinated kids. But the most incredible part, the most dystopian, Machiavellian, is that you're kicking the kids out who are unvaccinated on the argument they're more likely to spread, when the reality, the hard bench science reality, is the other way around. Not me saying it, FDA, consensus studies, CDC's response, FDA's response. They all know it's a problem. Okay. So that's pertussis. Let's keep going. By the way, for those who get the pertussis vaccine, that reduction in symptoms after 6 shots wanes to about 34% effectiveness after 6 shots in 2 to 4 years. And according to another study, this is from the CDC, to 8.9% a little bit after 4 years. So whatever reduction in symptoms after 6 shots you're getting goes away pretty quickly anyway. But that's, neither here nor there for the school argument. Okay, let's move on to diphtheria vaccine. Diphtheria is a toxoid vaccine. That means the vaccine does not have any part of the actual diphtheria bacteria in it. Let me say that again. It has no part of the actual bacteria. It just has a toxin that is sometimes released by the bacteria that can cause harm. That toxin, treated in formaldehyde, is what's in the vaccine and then injected. So think about that. Does the vaccine have any antigens in it that attack the bacteria itself? No. It's a toxoid vaccine. Tetanus vaccine's like that too. It has zero antigens in the vial that attack the actual bacteria. And that bacteria, the diphtheria bacteria, is only dangerous sometimes when it's actually been infected by a different virus, lyophilized. But in any event, here's this is a CDC study when truth was original. And they first looked at this back in the 70s. And let's read the words of the CDC authors. Diphtheria toxoid helps prevent symptomatic disease, but does not prevent the carrier state nor stop the spread of infection. How could it? It doesn't actually attack the bacteria. The known importance of carriers in the spread of diphtheria and the demonstrated failure of toxoid to prevent the carrier state leads us to conclude that the concept of herd immunity is not applicable to the prevention of diphtheria. You can see here all the authors. They're all from the CDC. Okay. That brings us to tetanus. I told you I'd do the other ones quicker. I'm going to go real fast on the other ones. Tetanus. Everybody knows tetanus, I think. I think this one's like the one everybody does know. Tetanus is not communicable from person to person. It's impossible to spread tetanus. It does not spread from people to people, person to person. If it doesn't spread from person to person, can it be transmitted in school from a child to a child? No. Right. I know, right? It's like, how many times did they say that? Nobody bet. Yes. Here's the best part. To the extent that tetanus and diphtheria do provide immunity, it wanes rapidly such that you actually need a dose every 10 years as an adult. This is the adult childhood vaccine schedule. And right there you see tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. It says 1 dose of Tdap and then TD or Tdap booster every 10 years. Because the immunity that it does provide that can reduce symptoms goes away pretty rapidly. Here's the best part, so to speak. 40-something% of adults don't even get the boosters, right? So this idea of you got tetanus and diphtheria, they have nothing to do with herd immunity. They're not preventing transmission. They wane. They're not worried about the adults. You know, going back to what one of the folks on the stage was saying earlier about the basketball player, they still want him to get a shot because it's like more like a religion than it is about the data and the truth and the facts. All right, so we've covered one vaccine now, DTaP. That's the first of the 6 shots, okay? It has 3 components to it. The rest of them don't, except for one other. So those will go quicker for that reason, too. Before I move on from DTaP, anybody have any questions about that vaccine? Yes?
The slide before said for people born before 1957, it doesn't apply. Why are we different, those of us that are older?
That's for the MMR vaccine. We're going to get to that.
Oh, okay.
And everybody born before 57 is presumed to have had measles. Everybody had measles.
Okay. Thank you.
They're all dead, by the way. Nobody's alive. Everyone's dead. My grandparents died before they had my parents. It's been very tough. Okay. So we'll get back to any other question about DTaP, about pertussis, tetanus, diphtheria. Let's move on. Let's move on to the polio. Okay. So I'm going to make this one simple. I'm going to explain super briefly the scientific piece, and then I'm just going to read the CDC quote that you can read to your members of your assembly or your Senate, and then we'll move on from polio. Bottom line, polio proliferates. It is fecal to oral contamination. It proliferates in your intestinal tract. Okay? So if you're going to have immunity that prevents transmission of polio, you need immunity where? In your gut, in your intestinal tract. Absolutely. The current vaccine we've been using in America for over 2 decades, an activated polio vaccine, do we put it in the mouth? No. We inject it in the arm. Where does it create immunity? In the blood. IgG antibodies, not IgA antibodies that are in mucosal surfaces. Okay? Does not do anything to prevent infectious transmission. Oral polio vaccine that used to be used can create mucosal immunity, can prevent, to a degree, transmission of polio. It also causes paralysis, is why they stopped using it. So they now use, exclusively in the United States, since 2000, inactivated polio vaccine. And let's read the CDC's own words. Inactivated polio vaccine protects people against 3 types of poliovirus. IPV does not contain live virus, cannot cause disease. It protects people from polio disease, but, here it comes, does not stop transmission of the virus. When did the CDC go anti-vax, by the way? I must have missed that transition. I don't know. This is the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. This is the worldwide effort to eradicate polio. WHO, Rotary, CDC, UNICEF, and the leaders in health authority, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And let's just read what they write. IPV induces very low levels of immunity in the intestines. As a result, when a person immunized with IPV is infected with wild poliovirus, the virus can still multiply inside the intestines and be shed in the feces, risking continued circulation. IPV does not stop transmission of the virus. So, again, whatever one thinks of the polio vaccine, whatever one thinks about heart medicine or asthma inhalers, maybe think they're great, best thing ever invented, everybody should have 10 of them, but shouldn't be mandated to get them. No. Meningococcal vaccine, 3rd vaccine required for school. I'll just read you this one quote from, again, the CDC. Rates of meningococcal disease have declined in the United States since the 1990s and remain low today. Much of the decline occurred before the routine use of meningococcal vaccines. Who took over the CDC website? I'm so sorry?
Is this the same as meningitis?
This is MEN4. This is MENACWY, known as MEN4, known as meningococcal, known as we'll call it meningitis. Yeah. So it's the one required for 7th grade in Minnesota. So CDC website, data suggests MEN-ACWY vaccines have provided protection to those vaccinated. Again, they can reduce symptoms, but probably not to the larger unvaccinated community population or herd immunity. And they say that reluctantly, because it's what the data clearly shows. It doesn't provide any herd immunity. It can potentially, and the vaccine itself, by the way, it's so uncommon that actually they don't even really know when they license the vaccine how many cases happen every year. They estimate about 100, the whole country. That's what they estimate. They're not sure. And since it's so low, the incidence, that the clinical trial didn't actually demonstrate a reduction in actual any like hospitalization or death or anything between the control and the vaccinated group. They just did it based on blood markers. That's it. They even say that. I mean, if you can read, there's between those 3 dots, I think it says it. So anyway, okay. Oh, and by the way, the protection wanes in most adolescents in 5 years. Again, CDC. Did you take over the CDC website? No, I'm sorry. Okay, if you do, call me. Okay. All right, that's okay. That's 3 vaccines. 4th vaccine required for school. Okay? Hepatitis B. The normal way hepatitis B is transmitted is it can be if a mother is pregnant and she has hepatitis B, she can't transmit it to the baby. Every pregnant woman is tested for surface antigens to the hepatitis B virus. So they know. But babies aren't going to school anyway. Second common way is through highly promiscuous sex workers and so forth. Not your typical student in school. Third is intravenous drug users. Okay. In a typical classroom, and I don't know what goes on in Minnesota, I didn't expect any dissent on that comment, frankly. I'll be honest. You know, in a classroom setting that you're not going to transmit hepatitis B, I mean, it would be it would take a lot of work. And you can see here, so we FOIA the CDC, and we say, hey, can you provide, quote, this is what we asked the CDC to give us, documentation sufficient to reflect any, that includes one, any, or half a case, I guess, any cases of transmission of hepatitis B in an elementary, middle, or high school setting. The response, a search, this is the CDC, a search of our records failed to reveal any documents pertaining to your request. So do they have a single instance of any child getting hepatitis B in a school classroom setting? No. Okay. So what would be the rights-crushing, parent right-destroying, freedom-crushing reason to require parents to give their children a hepatitis B vaccine to go to school? It's incredibly punitive. You're just saying, no, do what we say, your kid can't go to school. Yeah. It's just punitive. That's all it is. Okay. And of course, by the way, anybody who wants hepatitis B vaccine is free to get it. Or the DTaP, or meningococcal, or the polio. Nobody should be prevented from getting them. Nobody should be mandated to get them. All right, that brings us to the fifth vaccine required for school. Chickenpox vaccine. Now, chickenpox vaccine does have an ability, because it is a live virus vaccine, it actually gives you chickenpox. Now, gives you, the virus after it's been grown on the aborted cell line of fetal tissue, aborted fetal cell lines. That's a substrate, because viruses can't just grow on anything. They need to grow in cells, and it's passaged. So you get a little Frankenstein version of the virus, but you get a virus of some kind that's kind of similar to the varicella virus, chickenpox virus. And here's the thing about it. Those who get the vaccine, who get the virus, they actually can transmit the chickenpox virus, the Frankenstein version, to other people. Not me saying it, by the way. It's Merck saying it. It's the manufacturer. This is the package insert written by Merck, approved by the FDA. And let's just read what it says, and let's talk about the implications of what does that mean in terms of policy, in terms of excluding children from school for not having the chickenpox vaccine. So on the package insert for Verivax, it says at the top, avoid close contact with high-risk individuals susceptible to varicella because of possible transmission of varicella vaccine virus. Go to section 5.3, conveniently right there below, section 5.3. Transmission of varicella vaccine virus resulting in varicella infection, including disseminated disease, may occur between vaccine recipients who develop or do not develop a varicella-like rash. So they may or may not have symptoms. You have no idea. Get the shot. You might be transmitting chickenpox virus to somebody. You won't even know it. And contacts susceptible to varicella, including healthy, so even healthy people. So, and a child that gets the varicella vaccine with no symptoms can transmit it to a totally healthy child. Again, not me saying it, Merck saying it. Including healthy as well as high-risk individuals. Due to the concern for transmission of vaccine virus, vaccine recipients should attempt to avoid, whenever possible, close association with susceptible high-risk individuals for up to 6 weeks following vaccination with Verivax. Is anybody here ever heard of a requirement to exclude a child that got a Verivax vaccine from school for 6 weeks after they get the shot? Okay. The time window for getting the shot is 4 to 6, second shot is 4 to 6 years of age. When do you start kindergarten here? 5? Okay. So, and a lot of parents often wait until school starts to catch up, right? So a lot of them are getting it en masse, right? School starting, a lot of them are getting the chickenpox vaccine, going into school. So we want to stop transmission of chickenpox virus in school. And kids who get the chickenpox vaccine can spread it in school. What that really leads you to understand is that they're not really so concerned about stopping the spread of chickenpox virus in school. That's the reality. You know why? Because the chickenpox virus is not very dangerous. It can be dangerous to a child who's extremely immunocompromised, right? But those kids are not in school. That's why they're not worried about these kids going to school. These high-risk groups they're talking about, they're not in school. Immunocompromised individual, if you are so immunocompromised that the varicella virus can harm you, so can the 1,407 other recognized species of immune pathogens, according to the CDC. So those kids they're not in school. So what does that leave us with? Pregnant folks will get tested for whether they're immune. You would know. But they're not excluding the kids who got the shot, who are going to be around potentially pregnant women. Until they actually exclude the kids who are getting the shot for 6 weeks, it totally undercuts their entire argument that they need to exclude kids who are not vaccinated. By the way, kids who don't even have chickenpox. And if they had chickenpox, more likely know it and go where? Home. But they'll say, yeah, but they can transmit it beforehand when they don't have symptoms, just like these children who get the vaccine. Again, I'm not, to be clear, we don't exclude children from school, right? We shouldn't exclude children who are vaccinated for chickenpox from school. Shouldn't exclude children who are unvaccinated is the point. Okay. Oh, okay, so that brings us to the sixth and final vaccine. All right? And just, sixth and final vaccine, the MMR vaccine. So this is what you often hear. Everyone, did I do enough exclamation points on that one? Or thank you. Everyone will die without the MMR vaccine. Without the vaccine, everyone died. Well, let's take a look at the actual data. Okay, just the numbers without the hyperbole. Measles vaccine, first licensed in 1963. 1963. There were approximately 400 deaths a year in each of the years prior to the licensure of the vaccine in 1963. In a time period in this country where there are still pockets of this country, like developing countries, where infectious diseases, including measles, were more dangerous, but still, 400 deaths. That was 1 in 500,000 Americans. This is mumps, first licensed 67, around 35 deaths a year on average. That's in the years prior, and this is rubella. 1969, about 15 deaths per year on average in the years prior. It's all available on the CDC, by the way. It used to be part of their pink book. Anybody familiar with the CDC's pink book? Okay, so that is their, they're on like the 14th or 13th, 15th edition or whatever. They're in some teen edition. And there was a table in there that included the number of deaths per year in the years before the vaccine was used. And we kept using it, and using it, and using it, and it's not in the pink book anymore. I don't know if it's because of us, but maybe. I don't know. But it's not there. But we have copies. So there you go. 440 deaths total from measles, mumps, and rubella on average every year in the years prior to vaccination. That's 1 in 450,000 Americans. Every death is a tragedy. We should care about every single person that dies from an infectious disease. We should care about every child injured by a vaccine as well. And we should also use rational, reasonable, calm, data-driven approach to making decisions, especially when it comes to individual and civil rights of parents, families, individuals in this country to decide the health care of their own children and themselves. Let's take a closer look. Let's go under the hood on measles on that number of 400, okay? This is an official chart from the CDC's, this was from the U.S. Public Health Service, a predecessor entity of the CDC, now part of the CDC. This chart was created in 1960-61. Before what? What didn't exist yet? Before measles vaccine. So when truth was original, when we didn't need to make graphs that make things look scary, here's what they showed you about measles. This is the measles mortality from an official United States government chart. The link is right below. You can go take a look at it. It's such a great resource. We use it all the time. I'm still waiting for that one to disappear. We have lots of copies. Disappear. It's fine. We have copies. You could see the mortality for measles went down over 98% from 1900 to 1960. Official federal government data. And when you click on this, not only do you see the chart, they also have the actual mortality table every year. So you could see the mortality rate by every 100,000 people. You can see the actual raw numbers from 1900 all the way to 1960. Did the measles vaccine have anything to do with the decline in the measles mortality from 1900 to 1960 by over 98%? How do you know that? There's no measles vaccine. I actually had a debate with the doctor once. It took 2 times to get that. I think he had a few to drink, though, to his. So, yes, nothing to do with it. So what did it? What causes it to decline? Yeah, whatever that cacophony of sounds was, yes. Yes. Water, clean water, sanitation, right? I mean, there was most infectious disease and mortality went down precipitously from 1900 up into the 1950s, 60s. The only one paradoxically that went up was polio, by the way. But that's a different story. But every other one pretty much, diphtheria, there's the same chart for diphtheria. And not only in the US, but also in England and other developed countries, you had this massive decline. Nothing to do with the measles vaccine. And like I said before, in 1963, when they came out with the measles vaccine, pockets of this country were still had the same conditions that cause an increase in mortality. So, how much of that 400 deaths per year would have continued to decline without the existence of the measles vaccine? We'll never truly know, but you can't say none. I mean, even Dr. Ed, I deposed the pediatrician who trains pediatricians at Vanderbilt University in a case. It's on the Highwire website, and I have a lengthy exchange with her on exactly this point. Even she had to concede that probably some of it, at least some of that 400 was might have been due not to the measles vaccine. Okay, so the point is this: when parents are making medical decisions, certainly when government officials are making decisions on whether or not to strip you of your rights, ability to go to school, work, make choices about your own children's lives, medical decisions, they should do it based on an objective reality of the evidence. Yeah. Again, my grandparents died before my parents were born. Never thought about that before, actually. It's got me. I feel like I'm in the Matrix. Anyway, again, it's not to minimize any death, but you got to have an objective look at it. 28 people in the country every year, right now, die from lightning, according to CDC. 28. Just giving a little perspective. Would we have been there or even below that by now without the measles vaccine? To be sure, I just want to point something out. It's really important to understand about measles. Measles can be dangerous to little babies and to folks who are older who didn't get measles. And in the pre-vaccine era, they didn't get measles. In the vaccine era, it has had the unfortunate, unintended consequence of making it so that there are gaps in immunity and people do not get measles at the right time if they get measles. So it can maybe make it a little more dangerous. Just want to make sure I put that out there. So it has a paradoxical effect. And I don't know if there's a simple solution to that, but there it is. Reality is the reality. There are other unintended consequences of measles. First time I saw this study, I was actually dumbfounded. This is a prospective, not retrospective, meaning not looking backwards, which can always be manipulated. Forward-looking, they tracked over 100,000 people in Japan for over 20 years, and they looked at a whole host of variables. One of them was measles and mumps, for those who got it, did they die of cardiovascular disease, and if so, when? The amazing finding, incredible finding, is that those that had measles and mumps had a far higher lifetime survival ratio from cardiovascular disease. As you could see, these charts make them nice and clear. So you could see that this is the percent that survived, right? So this is 100%, 95%, 90%, 85%. Those who did not have measles and mumps, you could see right here, the black line. The green are those who had measles and mumps. A far greater percentage of them were still alive and did not die from cardiovascular disease. I didn't make the world or measles and mumps, so I can't tell you exactly why measles and mumps are protective, but it might be that for whatever reason, measles has been around for thousands of years, and human beings have developed an ecological relationship with this virus, maybe because it conferred a survival advantage. At least this study seems to indicate as much. Remember, cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer of Americans, 700,000 Americans every year right now, according to the CDC. If eliminating measles and mumps has caused an increase of a few thousand of or some number of those deaths, you're quickly eroding the benefit, even the purported benefit, even assuming all 400, assuming no other improvements in acute medical care, no other improvements in any pockets of the country, assuming the measles vaccine. The only way to stop those deaths would be the measles vaccine. This study alone reflects that we might have had a serious unintended consequence by deploying these products for a virus that was going out the door, that was quickly becoming less lethal, that was coming like scarlet fever, like other viruses and pathogens that they tried and over to make vaccines, failed. Never were able to develop it. Pathogen eventually went out the door. You don't even hear about it today. If they had developed a vaccine for scarlet fever, you know what you'd be hearing today? We'd all be dead if we don't take the scarlet fever vaccine. Maybe. And you can just look here, by the way, for those who are, you could see there were statistically significant findings, right? You could see it doesn't cross the one line. So, for example, total cardiovascular disease, if you go across, for when you look at men, you could see a statistically significant reduction in cardiovascular disease, including after it was age-adjusted, including after it was adjusted by multivariable, including after adjusting for history of cardiovascular disease, also statistically significant reduction in total stroke, including after adjustments, and so forth. So this is a very, very robust study that was done prospectively, and a finding that you, at that point is you can't whitewash it. It was there. The data was what it was. I've not found a single study that rebuts this. That's it. This is the only study out there that does this. And I don't think the CDC is putting this on their website anytime soon, by the way. Okay. And these are a bunch of other studies, none of which are as robust as that study of 100,000 prospectively. They're smaller, but what they each show, and everybody should take a chance to look at it, the International Agency for Research on Cancer found that those who never had measles had a 66% increased risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and a 233% increased risk of Hodgkin's lymphoma. Lymphomas killed 21,000 Americans in 2022. I don't know what percentage of them might have been caused by eliminating measles and mumps. And you can go through this increase of those who've had measles and mumps have 50% less. Measles have 50% less of ovarian cancer, and there's a bunch of other information over there in these studies. These studies kind of stand unrebutted in the literature. They happened back often in the 80s, 70s, when the diseases were, when it was a good time period to do these kinds of studies. They didn't really show what I would say the health authorities who want to promote vaccines would want them to show, and nobody's really followed up with them, but they're there. They exist. They don't just disappear. Kind of like unvaccinated kids. When you kick them out of school, they don't disappear from the state, by the way. They're still there. All right. So let's take a quick look at the safety of the MMR vaccine, and we'll move on. So the current MMR vaccine was licensed in 1978. It was not licensed against the original MMR vaccine, which was licensed in 1971, because it's a very different product, because it includes millions of pieces of aborted fetal cell and DNA debris in it. And it was based on 834 children, no control, and 40 days of safety review. You know what you can assess with that kind of study in terms of safety? Virtually nothing. A third of the kids, by the way, in some of these, of the 834, and they had a bunch of little smaller trials. About a third had gastrointestinal issues and a third had respiratory issues. But apparently that wasn't a problem. If that wasn't a problem, I'm not sure why they bothered doing the study at all. But in any event, it's underpowered, meaning not enough people, didn't review safety long enough, and had no control. So it's pretty much a worthless study for safety. By early 1980s, there were only 3 routine vaccines in this country. That's it. DTP, OPV, and MMR. That was all. That was it. 3 routine vaccines. They were causing so much harm. So many people were suing and getting damages from the injuries that what happened? There was only one manufacturer left for each of those 3 products, and they went to Congress and they said, we're done. We're not making them anymore unless we have what? Immunity. So Congress, in their wisdom, said, planes, yeah, you can make those safer. Drugs, you can make those safer. Backhoes, farm equipment, chainsaws, all that stuff can be made safer. But childhood vaccines, the stuff you give to babies that we say is safe, okay, we'll give you immunity so you can keep selling your product that causes harms. We'll just make it so nobody can sue you. We won't make you make a better, safer product. You keep selling your defective, harmful product. We'll just make sure nobody can sue you, basically. And that's what Congress did. In 1986, they passed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. But not only did they give those manufacturers immunity for the 3 products that existed in 1986, they gave immunity for all vaccines going forward. So we had 2 injected, 1 oral vaccine by 1986. We now have 17 vaccines on the childhood schedule. You might recall that everyone was dying in the early 80s. Who was here in the early 80s? Everyone was dying. And now we have 17 shots and everybody's saved. Again, I hate to be glib about it, but it helps put things into perspective, because the immediate reaction you often get from folks, but everybody's going to die. Oh, everybody wasn't dying in the early 1980s, and we only had 3 shots. But a lot of people were getting very injured by these shots, and they had to give them immunity for injuries. So one of the things about that 1986 act is it required the CDC to create what's known as vaccine information statements by federal law, and it had to list what the CDC considered injuries that are caused by these products, okay? And they really tried hard to limit what they put on here. But this is the CDC's own vaccine information statement for the measles vaccine, MMR, and you can see it includes seizures, deafness, long-term seizures, lower consciousness, and brain damage. Not my words, CDC's words. And there's another thing about the safety of the MMR vaccine that people don't realize. When you have the package insert, that piece of paper that comes with every drug, and there's a list of all of the post-marketing potential adverse events, everybody tells you, oh, they just put it in everything in there. They just put any injury in there, right? They just list all the injuries in the package insert. Everybody know what I'm talking about when I say package insert, right? A little piece of paper, and you get the drug. The vaccines have the same piece of paper. Section 6.2 will list the post-marketing adverse events. It's not a list of just any random issue. Here's what the federal law requires. It provides that the package insert for vaccines should include, quote, only those adverse events for which there is some basis to believe there's a causal, not correlation, causal relationship between the drug and the occurrence of the adverse event, end quote. That is the legal standard. You can't just put anything in a package insert. Case in point, here's the package insert for the Moderna vaccine, okay, for the COVID-19 vaccine. I could tell you in our 10-person vaccine practice, we're overwhelmed with COVID vaccine injury calls, submissions, form filling, emails, texts, you name it. These are the only things listed on the Moderna COVID vaccine package insert, right? They've got myocarditis and pericarditis. They couldn't avoid that one. Anaphylaxis, that's their giveaway. And syncope means fainting. That's it. That's what they list. No doubt the vaccine causes far more harms. Those are the ones that the evidence is to the point where they can't not include it. This is the MMR vaccine. This presentation will be available publicly. You can go look at it. A lot of these are very serious conditions. And they're not here because somebody at Merck thought it'd be fun to include them. 2022, we finally get a second MMR vaccine in the United States. Merck was the only one till 2022. GSK gets one licensed. GSK's vaccine gets compared, MMR vaccine, to Merck's MMR vaccine. What would they find? Here's the chart that shows it to you. Top left is the study that they published. That is the last table in the supplemental table of authorities that you have to click to different part of the page to get to. It wasn't in the actual primary study if you wanted to see the results. They buried it in the supplemental table. And when you go to the supplemental table number 6, what you will find is that serious adverse events, and when an SAE, a serious adverse events, means something very, very serious under the FDA definition. Death, disability. 2.1% that got the MMR vaccine made by GSK had a serious adverse event, and 1.92% that got Merck's MMR vaccine. But they did something. That alone, by the way, that's 1 in 50 kids. 1 in 50. Okay, that should be enough to go, whoa, we got a problem. We got a serious problem. But then they did something that you won't see in most clinical trials that have happened for decades. They actually created a new separate category where they separated out some of what would normally have been in the SAEs, and they put them in the new onset chronic disease, as if that's somehow better. I'm not sure why. NOCDs, so it's a new on a chronic disease, like the last thing you'd want, right? 3.4% of the GSK MMR vaccinated kids had a new onset chronic health condition, 3.7% of the MMR2. Remember, they don't enroll typically kids who are sick or unhealthy. They enroll healthy children. It's not normal in a 6-month period for 3.4% of healthy kids to get a new onset chronic condition and 2% to have a serious adverse event, and about 10% to have an adverse event that's prompted an ER visit. But understand, the way that it works for licensure is that as long as the experimental group, the GSK MMR vaccine, and the control group, the Merck MMR vaccine, have the same rate of harm, that means they are equally safe by the FDA standards. Safe by the FDA standards, not safe by any reasonable thinking, rational standard. Certainly not by the standard, I think, of most parents seeking to make good medical decisions for their children. All right, that's it. That's the 6 vaccines. I told you it'd be a little bit of a slog to get through it. I'll have some videos. I know people like to watch videos. I got videos coming up, so it'll be a lot more interesting. But there it is. There's your 6 shots required in Minnesota. First 3 don't prevent transmission. 4th one, not happening in a school setting. Varicella, shedding for 6 weeks after you get the shot, and they're not excluding those kids. And then you have the MMR vaccine, and we've gone through and tried to put that into a real perspective to understand the real risks versus benefits and how it should be left to parent choice. The sky's not falling. All right. That brings us to part 2, elimination of the market forces for assuring safety. And we touched upon this briefly. Gosh. Wow, did that just go for an hour and a half? Okay, in about an hour. All right. So I'll go through the rest of it a little bit quicker. Eliminating market forces is a big deal. That literally is how you assure product safety. All the products you have in your society around you every day, they're safer because the companies who make them don't want to lose money. That's it. That's really that is the most important impetus. Market forces, and then I put regulators. You see a little small thing right there? I did that on purpose. Regulators, not as important. Market forces, very important. Guaranteed market plus no liability has resulted from that. 1986, 2023, that's the childhood vaccine schedule. That's what we've gone through. I've interlaced it over here so you can kind of see really visually the difference. Clinical trials. Why are clinical trials critical? Because after a vaccine is licensed, you can't do a clinical trial. They say it's unethical. But a clinical trial is what you need to actually prove causation between a claimed injury and the product, which is why doing a good, robust clinical trial is so important. And what's a good clinical trial? Proper control, enough people in it so it's properly powered, and reviewing safety for long enough. Those 3 features. That's what makes a good clinical trial. Here's the impact on eliminating market forces, okay? These are the top 5 selling drugs by Pfizer according to some website. Okay? When you look at these 5 drugs, 4 of them are drugs, 1 of them is a vaccine. Enbrel, Eliquis, Lyrica, and Lipitor are all drugs. What did they have as a control in their clinical trial? Placebo. How long was safety reviewed? 6 years, 7 years, 2 years, 5 years. Why? Because they want to know the safety. If Pfizer puts these products on the market and they cause harm, what's going to happen? They're going to get sued, they're going to have to pay damages, and they don't want that. They want to make money. Which one is different than the others? Pfizer, right? The Prevnar 13 vaccine given at 2, 4, and 6 months of age. Half a year, licensed against PCV7. And that vaccine was licensed, by the way, in a clinical trial that compared it to another experimental vaccine. Can't make this stuff up. You can watch one of my other presentations to see that whole skit. Here are the vaccines in the first 6 months of life. Hepatitis B, safety review period, 5 days, IPV. You could see the difference between years versus days or weeks. Prevnar 6 months, and what the control was. Not a single one actually had a placebo. And that's true, by the way, for virtually every single vaccine on the childhood schedule. None had a placebo control group. Typically, all the clinical trials were days or weeks of safety review. Some had 6 months. But without a proper control, what are you comparing it to? And they're often very underpowered. That is the effect. That is the real world impact of eliminating the market forces. You disincentivize proper clinical trials, which are critical for assuring safety before the product gets to market. Because once it gets to market, a machine takes over. Marketing machine, a regulatory machine to promote them. Here's an example of the clinical trial for the hepatitis B vaccines. You don't have to take my word for it. It was the first one on the list. It says in 3 clinical studies, Recambavax HB were administered to 147 healthy infants and children up to 10 years of age who were monitored 5 days after each dose. Section 6.1, if you look at section 6.1 of every package insert, that is where it summarizes the clinical trial. That is the clinical trial relied upon to license the vaccine given to babies on the first day of life. It seems so outrageous, by the way, we FOIA'd for the underlying clinical trial documents. I can confirm it's 5 days. We also have the FDA's summary basis of approval because it seems so unbelievable. If I wanted to make up the most nefarious, craziest thing about vaccines, I wouldn't have thought to say that.
It is my great honor to use the Stanley Plotkin gavel to open this meeting.
It's our good friend and colleague, Dr. Stan Plotkin.
Dr. Plotkin.
Virtually every country in the world is affected by his vaccines.
He was involved in pivotal trials on anthrax, oral polio, rabies vaccine,
Rubella vaccine, the rotavirus vaccine, rabies.
He has earned the Distinguished Physician Award of the Pediatric Infectious Disease Society, the Finland Award of the National Foundation for Infectious Diseases, the Hilleman Award of the American Society for Microbiology, the French Legion of Honor, and the Bruce Medal in Preventive Medicine.
He's a member of the Institute of Medicine and the French Academy of Medicine.
One of the very special things about him is the global impact that he's had, not just from the products, but from his book.
He developed the standard textbook for vaccines in 1988.
Bill Gates calls his book a Bible for vaccinologists.
I hope you all have indeed have read the book, and I hope it's more accurate than the Bible.
He trained just a generation of scientists, including myself, to think like he thinks.
Dr. Plotkin, earlier you testified that there are 2 Hep B vaccines in the market, one by Glaxo, GSK, that's Engerix B, and the other one is by Merck, Recambavax HB, right?
Yes.
This is the product, the manufacturer insert for Recambavax HB, correct?
Yes.
And the clinical trial experience would be found in section 6.1, correct? Correct? Dr. Plotkin?
Yes.
Okay. In section 6.1, when you look at the clinical trials that were done pre-licensure for Recambavax HB, how long does it say that safety was monitored after each dose?
Let's see. 5 days.
Is 5 days long enough to detect an autoimmune issue that arises after 5 days?
No.
Is 5 days long enough to detect any neurological disorder that arose from the vaccine after 5 days?
No.
There is no control group, correct?
It does not mention any control group, no.
No. If you turn to section 6.2, under immune system disorders, does it say that there were reports of hypersensitive reactions, including anaphylactoid reactions, bronchospasms, and urticaria having been reported within the first few hours after vaccination?
Yes.
Have there been reports of hypersensitivity syndrome?
Yes, that's what it states.
Reports of arthritis?
It is mentioned.
Okay. It also reports autoimmune diseases, including systemic lupus, erythematosus, lupus-like syndrome, vasculitis, and polyarteritis nodosa as well, correct?
Yes, that's what it states.
And also it states that under the nervous system disorders, it states that there have been reports of Guillain-Barré syndrome, correct?
Yes.
As well as multiple sclerosis, exacerbation of multiple sclerosis, myelitis, including transverse myelitis, seizure, febrile seizure, peripheral neuropathy, including Bell's palsy, radiculopathy. Thank you very much. Muscle weakness, hypothesia, and encephalitis, correct?
Correct.
These are events that are reported after vaccination, and as we've just discussed, in order to establish whether it's causal between the vaccine and the condition, you need a randomized, placebo-controlled study. But
yes.
That was not done for this hepatitis B vaccine before licensure, was it?
No.
Okay. And given that the vaccine now appears on the CDC's recommended list, isn't it true that it would now be considered unethical to conduct such a study today?
It would be, yes, it would be ethically difficult.
And that highlights the importance of a clinical trial, right? From the world's leading authority on vaccines. Okay, let's get to the post-licensure safety. I'll say one last thing before we do that. I can't stress the importance of the clinical trials because that is what, when a parent calls us and says, hey, my child had X after a vaccine, if it was a drug, I'd want to go to the clinical trial data, pull it up. I could see years of safety comparing vaccinated versus placebo. Did that appear? Did anybody have it? You don't have that with vaccines. All you have is this retrospective. All you have is the post-licensure safety data. That's pretty much it. And let's take a look at that quickly, okay? So a lot of people will tell you, and I've had this discussion, well, maybe the trials are not great. Vaccinologists, immunologists will tell you this. But after licensure, they're definitely studied, right? They're definitely studied. They definitely study every claimed injury. Every time you say it can cause this or that, they say, rest assured, vaccines don't cause it. Don't worry, there's over 100 serious injury vaccines. And what is the one, the claim that they say they have studied most thoroughly and have assured you the vaccines don't cause it? They say vaccines do not cause? Autism. Okay. I don't want to make it about autism, but we're going to use autism as the example, okay, of an injury claimed from a vaccine, and let's see what studies they've done. Because remember, that's the injury they say. We studied this thing through hundreds, millions, billions there are more studies than people on the planet. We've studied this thing. Don't worry, right? They assure you. So if they really haven't done that for autism, what are the chances they've done it for all the other serious harms for vaccines that parents complain routinely to us at the firm and otherwise in literature, for whatever reason, don't get media attention, even though some of them are far more common than autism in terms of their complaints from vaccines. Okay, so let's take a look at that. This is the CDC website, and this is what people say about vaccines and autism.
We're not sure as a scientific community what causes autism, but we know that vaccines do not.
Vaccines are really the one thing we have looked at as causing autism.
Yeah, and I agree with you.
We know that vaccines don't cause autism. The science is clear.
Vaccines don't cause autism.
I do not deny in any way that we need to do more about autism, but it has nothing to do with vaccines.
Let me be clear. Vaccines do not cause autism.
Vaccines don't cause autism.
Absolutely sure.
Absolutely sure.
Okay, there you go. Case closed. Well, I don't know. What does informed consent mean? Oh, it means maybe we look at the data, right? And not just take their word for it. So let's do that. Okay. Despite the fact that public health authorities will repeatedly and with their billion-dollar media machine tell you vaccines don't cause autism, to this day, based on the studies surveying parents of children with autistic kids, 40 to 70% of them will tell you that they believe that their child's autism is caused by one or more vaccines. Sometimes you can't unlearn what you've seen, I guess. And what vaccines do they typically blame? All the ones that just became red. Let's do that one more time. These are the ones listed in those studies. Hep B, DTaP, Hib, pneumococcal, that's the Pfizer one, IPV, and MMR. Now, all the other ones are given in the first 6 months of life, each, 3 times each. So we've got Hep B, again, DTaP, Hib, PCV13, Prevnar 13, and IPV. 5 different shots given 3 times each. That's 15 doses of vaccine that parents are saying they believe caused their child's autism. And then at 1 year of life or later, they get an MMR vaccine. Okay? So if you want to say vaccines don't cause autism, you would say you'd have to show that those vaccines don't cause autism, right? Presumably they have studies that show that. And by the way, this idea, I know a lot of people focus on the MMR vaccine and they say, oh, it's the MMR. Just to show you that it's always been the other vaccines. This is the 1986 Act, right? We talked about it earlier, National Child Act 1986. Look at this. In the 1986 Act, it listed 11 of the most common claimed injuries from vaccines at the time. And it told federal health authorities, do a survey review to see whether the vaccines are causing these issues. And what vaccine did they ask them to do with regards to autism? Was it MMR? No. It was pertussis vaccine. Pertussis vaccine. Highly effective vaccine. Secretary of Health and Human Services shall complete a review of all relevant medical and scientific information of the nature, circumstances, and extent of the relationship, if any, between vaccines containing pertussis and the following illnesses and conditions: autism. 1986, Andrew Wakefield, did not publish a study until the late 90s, over a decade later. Parents were complaining about pertussis vaccine causing autism a decade prior. Nothing to do with MMR. Okay, great. Good news. Congress said to our health authorities, please study this. Our health authorities went and commissioned the Institute of Medicine. The Institute of Medicine then did a review of all the scientific literature. And what did they find? No evidence bearing on causal relationship. What does that mean? No category of evidence was found being on a judgment about causation. All categories of evidence left blank in Table 1.1. Let me translate that. They could not find one study, one way or another. Nothing. They didn't find any studies. Not a study showing that it does cause autism. Not a study showing it doesn't cause autism. No studies either epidemiologically or mechanistically or in any other category. There was literally zero. It was actually the only condition where they could find no evidence one way or another. All the other ones, they could find something out there that either tilted it towards it doesn't cause it, it does cause it. They say they don't know. Well, okay, great. You think at some point they would actually they would study it. That was the former head. I'll skip ahead. That's the former head of the NIH who says, we haven't studied this issue whether vaccines cause autism. We got to study this thing. And she says, I'm a little concerned because it looks like the health authorities are scared to do it because if they find, even if some kids have autism from vaccines, people will freak out and nobody will vaccinate. That's a terrible reason not to do it. I mean, we have all kinds of drugs that have problems with some people and we still, okay. Let's skip ahead to 2012. Again, the CDC and another federal health agency commissioned the Institute of Medicine yet again. And this time, they again asked them to look at whether pertussis, as well as tetanus and diphtheria vaccines, can cause autism. Why? Because this study looked at the 100 and something most commonly claimed injuries from vaccines. Here we are, over 3 decades after the 1986 Acts. And pertussis, containing tetanus and diphtheria now as well, causing autism is still one of the most commonly claimed injuries from, that they cause autism is one of the most commonly claimed injuries. Well, again, they conducted a review of all the scientific literature, and they said the evidence is inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship between diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid, or acellular pertussis vaccines and autism. By the way, so if you don't know whether it causes autism, how are they saying vaccines don't cause autism? Aren't those in conflict? Yeah. Only if you're logical. Now, if you look up, they did find one study. One. You can see right there, Geyer and Geyer. This was not considered in the weight of evidence because it provided data from a passive surveillance system and lacked an unvaccinated comparison population. So they threw it out. Do you know what data it relied upon? Theirs. And you know what it found? It found a correlation between DTaP and autism. So the only study they found, only study they could find, showed a correlation between DTaP and autism, but they threw it out because it was based on VAERS data. Okay, that's not good. Well, let's see what Dr. Plotkin has to say about this.
This is an excerpt from the...
And this is, I'm asking him about the IOM report I just showed you.
This is an excerpt from the IOM's report, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you read the causality conclusion with regard to whether DTaP and Tdap cause autism?
The evidence is inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship between diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid, or acellular pertussis containing vaccine and autism.
If you don't know whether DTaP or Tdap cause autism, shouldn't you wait until you do know, until you have the science to support it, to then say that vaccines do not cause autism?
Do I wait? No, I do not wait, because I have to take into account the health of the child.
And so for that reason, you're okay with telling the parent that DTaP, Tdap does not cause autism, even though the science isn't there yet to support that claim?
Absolutely.
What do we call that? Okay, so Dr. Plotkin says what he says. That's in 2018. So then in 2019, on behalf of ICANN, the Informed Consent Action Network, we submitted a few FOIA requests. And we said, hey, CDC, can you kindly provide us, quote, all studies relied upon by CDC to claim that DTaP vaccines does not cause autism. We made the same request for the Hep B vaccine, Prevnar, Hib, IPV. Those 5 shots given 3 times each in the first 6 months of life, as well as the studies that show the cumulative doses of those vaccines do not cause autism. Surely they have one study. One study. Well, after they wouldn't provide us any studies, we sued them in federal court. And this is a final stipulation in which the CDC finally listed 20 studies. You can see them numbered 1 through 20. They say these are the 20 studies they rely upon to say that vaccines don't cause autism, that all those vaccines given in the first 6 months do not cause autism. When they made that list, I got the stipulation from the Department of Justice with the DOJ attorney that we're working with. And I remember having an exchange with them, and I said, I read the studies. None of them involve the vaccines I'm asking you about. I said, and in fact, only one of them discusses a single vaccine at issue in this case. And that's the 2011 IOM report we just looked at, which is one on the list here, for DTaP. And I said, it only lists one study that shows vaccines do cause autism, and they threw it out. I said, are you sure The CDC wants to provide me a list of 20 studies that don't actually support in any way the 5 vaccines that ICANN is asking you to provide studies to say that vaccines don't cause autism. As you can see, the Department of Justice signed the stipulation. Right here. Right there. See it? Right there. United States Attorney, signed by Zachary Bannon, Assistant U.S. Attorney. On behalf of the CDC, I signed it on behalf of ICANN. It was entered as an order of the court. That's a federal judge, an Article 3 judge. And this is it. This is a binding order of a federal court in which you have 20 studies. 18 of them involve thimerosal, which is not an ingredient in any of the vaccines we asked about, or MMR, not a vaccine we asked about. One involved antigens, not vaccine, and that study itself says it can't tell you whether vaccines cause autism or not because it didn't look at that. It just looks at antigen exposure. And then one involving MMR, thimerosal, and DTaP, and that's the 2012 IWIM report you just saw me ask Dr. Stanley Plotkin about. So 0 involved vaccines that requested, except for the one DTaP, which found one study with the correlation. I'll show you one more video, and then you'll hear me say what I know you all are going to expect me to say about post-licensure safety. This is an opportunity to depose Dr. Catherine Edwards. You see the 4 authors of Plotkin. This is the medical textbook on vaccines. She's the 3rd listed, and at this point, she's probably one of the top 3 vaccinologists in the country, if not top 2, effectively. Maybe Paul Offit, her, something like that. Let's see what she has to say. In a case involving vaccines and autism, I just want to be clear, and surprise her and trick her in this deposition. I don't have magical powers. I just asked questions. That's all I did. In a case, again, about vaccines and autism.
According to your profile, you have done most of the pivotal trials relied upon to license many of the vaccines, correct, on the market?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you're highly experienced at conducting clinical trials, correct?
I'm highly experienced conducting clinical trials.
And you're familiar with many of the clinical trials that relied upon to license many of the vaccines currently on the market, correct?
I am.
In your opinion, did the clinical trials relied upon to license the vaccines that Yates received, many of which are still on the market today, were they designed to rule out that the vaccine causes autism?
No. You've badgered me into answering the question the way you want me to, but I think that that's probably the answer.
Is that your accurate and truthful testimony?
Yes.
In the expert disclosures for this case, it asserts that, among other things, you will testify that, quote, the issue of whether vaccines cause autism has been thoroughly researched and rejected, end quote. It's your testimony that MMR vaccine cannot cause autism.
That's correct.
It's your testimony that Hep B vaccine cannot cause autism.
That's correct.
It's your testimony that iPol cannot cause autism.
Yes.
It's your testimony that HIV vaccine cannot cause autism.
Yes.
It's your testimony that varicella vaccine cannot cause autism.
Yes.
It's your testimony that Prevnar vaccine cannot cause autism.
Yes.
And it's your testimony that DTaP vaccine cannot cause autism.
Yes.
And do you have a study that supports that DTaP doesn't cause autism?
I do not have a study that DTaP causes autism. So I don't have either.
Do you have any study one way or another of whether iPol causes autism?
No, I do not, sir.
Do you have any study one way or another of whether NGRX-B causes autism?
I do not have any evidence that it causes autism, nor that it does not.
And what about Hib titers vaccine? Any evidence one way or another of whether it causes autism?
No.
And what about Prevnar vaccine? Any evidence one way or another?
No, sir. No, sir.
And how about varicella vaccine? Let me just finish. Are there any studies one way or another that support whether it does or doesn't cause autism?
Part of MMR, but not as varicella by itself. No, sir. No studies that say it does, or no studies that say it doesn't.
Right.
There have been studies that have found an association between hepatitis B vaccine and autism, correct?
Not studies that I feel are credible.
Okay, which study are you referring to when you say that?
Well, why don't you show me the study and then I'll see whether I agree with it.
So, so hold on a second. I didn't do it. She did it. Honestly, I just asked questions. So there's what the public health authorities tell you when they're putting stuff on websites and on CNN, or they're publishing stuff, and then there's what they say when they're under oath, and they're very different. They tell you vaccines do not cause autism. You don't even need to. You're a parent. It's not your job to prove the vaccines are not safe. It's their job to show you that it is safe. They have not done that. And if they haven't done it for autism, the thing that they say they've studied more than anything, what do you think they've done for the other 100 serious adverse events that are listed on the package inserts that the manufacturers say they have a causal reason to believe might be related? They don't list autism, by the way, but they do list over 100 other serious conditions. Just to put this in perspective, these are all the vaccines in the childhood vaccine schedule. Those are the 2 vaccines they say they've studied, that they actually have any studies for it, MMR. Okay? These are the ingredients, just a partial list. That's the ingredient they say they've studied, not even in most vaccines, and not in the ones in the first 6 months that we asked about. I'd like to show you that it can be humorous, obviously, but for the families who have children in this situation, it's anything but humorous. And I'll show you a short clip of this wonderful couple.
Hi, how you doing? We have triplets, 2 boys and a girl, Richie, Robbie, and Claire. Every day in our life was a party. Every single day they were smiling and laughing and looking at each other, engaging in each other. On June 25th, 2007, we brought them in for the pneumococcal shot. My daughter still has the mark on her leg from the shot. She was the first one to get it, and she screamed and never really stopped screaming after that. But we continued. We didn't know. We did the boys as well. By noon, Claire shut completely off. It was as if she was blind and deaf, and all she did at that moment was stare at the ceiling fan. So that was at noon. We had the shot at 10 a.m. 2 o'clock, we watched Richie shut off. They lost all their reflexes. I'm an educational audiologist. I actually did the test for the stapedial reflex, which is a little muscle in the middle ear, just to see if a muscle they can't control was still working, and it didn't. The stapedial reflex dampens sound, so your ears don't hurt from a really loud sound, and both of them had no stapedial reflex. They stopped blinking, stopped yawning, stopped coughing, stopped sneezing.
The worst is when we saw the final one shut down. We were told it was genetic. And then we were told by geneticists that there's no possible way 3 children would shut off on the same day. So we had severe autism spectrum disorder for all 3 kids entering kindergarten. We have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to recover them. The only person that we got back is Robbie, the one that was last to shut off. Richie can only say single, maybe 2 words together. Claire is still completely nonverbal, not potty trained, and Robbie is approaching grade level, but severe OCD. So,
what do you do? What's your
property management? Let me tell you what a day in our life is. So you got, say, a 6 or 7 or 8 year old child who's not potty trained, and at 2 or 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning they fill their diaper. Well, you assume that's pretty uncomfortable, so they take it off. Pretty soon it's all over them, it's all over the bed. In short order, it's all over me, it's all over her. I'm snapping at her, she's snapping at me. We're both snapping at the kid, who is the only innocent party in the whole scenario. And the one thing that's conspicuously absent from that scenario is anybody who told you that shot was safe. They're all asleep in their bed. They haven't got a problem in the world.
It's heartbreaking each time I watch it, but it's so true. This is the federal law I mentioned earlier that provides that the package inserts for vaccines should only include those where there's some basis to believe there's a causal relationship. And there are over 100 serious adverse events listed by pharma because they had a basis to believe they are a causal relationship, and these are some of the same issues. We get calls at our firm for all the time, but there's not much we can do for any of those families in terms of the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which is the only place you can seek compensation. You can sue for vaccine injuries. The only place you can sue is you sue the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. That is the head of the federal government's health department, in which CDC, FDA, NIH is located. They're statutorily required to fight any claim of vaccine injury. And you don't get a constitutional judge, Article 3 judge from the Constitution, you get a special master. And you don't get any discovery as of right. You can't just go depose the pharma companies or get documents. Extremely limited program. And we don't have clinical trial data, and we don't have post-licensure data. And we have to fight against the Department of Justice. So very little we can often do, unfortunately, for many families who call us about many of those issues. But they are real. Those kids are real. Those harms are real. They don't go away. But autism, I think, really does have a good reflection. It's the best example I think I can provide you of when we look at the post-marketing literature for other issues, how vacuous it is. Nobody has an incentive to do it, not the pharma companies and not the federal health authorities. If they do a study, it shows a harm, we'll use it against them in vaccine court. And they also take their duty to promote vaccines very seriously, and it has entirely overtaken any safety duty that they have. Pharma companies also have an annual kitty of billions of dollars. Just like car companies promote their products, they promote their products. How? Money flowing to medical journals, medical associations, schools, public relations firms, and so forth. $1 billion machine every year promotes vaccines by the pharma company and the industry. Gets us to conflicted regulators. Because this is where people finally, I think a lot of people go, all right, okay, clinical trials are so bad, post-licensure is so bad. Why would the regulators do this? We get the pharma companies, they want to make money. Why would these CDC officials, FDA officials, why would they do this? We just talked about who's responsible for vaccine safety. They are. Federal regulators. Why? Because the pharma companies were giving complete immunity effectively. There's some exceptions. And Congress recognized they left a vacuum in that market force. So they made the federal health authorities responsible. Well, let's see what they've been doing. Here's a report by Congress in 2000 of the FDA and CDC's vaccine committee. Here's an excerpt from that report. Quote, and some of you might know it's ACIP and VRBAC. That might sound familiar to some folks. The overwhelming majority of members, both voting members and consultants, have substantial ties to the pharmaceutical industry, end quote. That's a congressional report making that finding, not me. And by the year 2000, most of the vaccines on the childhood schedule came about after 1986, and then through the 90s is when the gold rush happened, when the immunity first came in place. So a lot of these vaccines. Now, you would think that after this actually really embarrassing, scathing report, which, by the way, lists Dr. Catherine Edwards in it as well, but only caught like a tiny fraction of her conflicts based on our research. You think they'd clean up their act. No. Here's a report from 2009 by the HHS Inspector General, again finding incredible conflicts between those who serve on the advisory committees in the federal health authorities and pharmaceutical companies. Well, you think after that they'd clean up their act. I'll show you one more video with Dr. Edwards, and this has to do with the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, right? So we can get real recent. She sat on the Data Safety Monitoring Board. This was like a 5-member committee. Everybody was relying upon to assure the safety of the COVID-19 vaccine. Let's see if she had any conflicts with Pfizer.
Isn't it true that you've also been an advisor to Pfizer?
Yes, sir. I have been an advisor to Pfizer, and I've been working very closely with Pfizer, particularly their COVID vaccines and going over lots of reactions and adverse events. So yes, I am working and being paid by Pfizer for my assessment of vaccine safety.
You're part of the data safety monitoring board for the
That's
Pfizer
correct.
COVID vaccine. Is that what you meant when you
That
just
is
said that?
correct.
You're one of the only 5 members of that data safety monitoring board over the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, right?
Yes, sir, I am.
And that's supposed to be an independent data safety monitoring board, correct?
It is an independent data safety and monitoring board.
That's the board that all of us in America are hoping on and relying upon is going to independently make sure that safety is properly assessed as the clinical trial for that Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine is ongoing, correct?
That's true, and let me tell you that we have worked very hard to go over this and worked very, very hard to do that indeed as comprehensively as we possibly can.
And since it's supposed to be independent, it's critical that the members of that independent data safety monitoring board are in fact independent of the pharmaceutical company whose product is being evaluated, correct?
That's correct.
But isn't it true that directly before becoming a member of the independent data safety monitoring board of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, you were an advisor to Pfizer?
Pfizer pays me to evaluate the safety of their vaccines because I'm an expert. So I do get paid to do the work that I've been doing, but I've been doing the work conscientiously and comprehensively.
My question was, before you became a member of the independent data safety monitoring board for the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, isn't it true that you were separately, before you held that independent position, you were an advisor to Pfizer?
Yes, sir, but I think what you're presuming is that because I've been an advisor makes me on their dole or makes me going to say what they want me to say. That is not and has never been a part of my being. I say what I believe based on my expertise.
So you don't think that financial incentives can sway people's judgment at all?
It does not sway my judgment, sir.
Why bother having an independent data safety monitoring board? Why doesn't Pfizer just have some of its employees on it?
Because we are independent.
Meaning folks who were never advisors to Pfizer.
We are independent from Pfizer in this assessment.
I'm sure that every... I don't know what to say, but I'm sure that every member of the VRBAC and ACIP committee who sat on there and decided that yes, X vaccine should be licensed or they should be on the CDC schedule, who similarly have conflicts, all thought, I'm above that. I'm above that. That's not going to affect my judgment. What's scary about this is it's a deathly serious issue. And what makes it even the more troubling is that, the safety and efficacy of products, we can all sit back and say, yeah, I don't know if it's safe or effective. We could do that for drugs and so forth. And we can make our own judgment about whether or not we want to trust these regulators. Except for one product, really, vaccines. That's where they want to take the choice away from you. And that's where, and what do they do? What do they say as the basis to take away that right? One of the main claims they make is that it's right, which makes that claim not only a medical claim, it makes it a legal, civil rights, political claim, because they use it to take away your rights, right? They cry and moan, why are lawyers talking about safety and efficacy? Well, stop taking people's rights based on that claim, and I'll stop coming on these stages. Well, I don't come on these stages often, but that's it. But yeah, well, a lot of folks would stop I think, having an issue. It's the mandates that are really a big problem. Okay, moving forward. Here's the FDA website, by the way. That's one of my favorites. It shows, wait, this is the FDA homepage. Does that look like a regulator or does that look like an ad? And what are they advertising? The bivalent vaccine boosters. Question, is that licensed? Oh, it's not licensed. So they're promoting an unlicensed product. I'm sure that in no way will impact their judgment when they're deciding whether to license it. I'm sure that the guy, Dr. Peter Marks, who heads the vaccine division at the FDA, when he's going out and doing all these YouTube videos telling everybody to get this vaccine, will in no way influence his judgment after telling millions of Americans, go get the shot. It's great. Go get it. Stick it in your arm. Pregnant women, children, everybody, jab it in. Go get it. And then when he's sitting there in his office saying, should I license this as safe and effective? Or should I go tell the American people, oops, license. I'm sure that has no impact on his judgment. None. He's above that too. No doubt. And look, the proof's in the pudding too. Look, FDA was totally transparent when we asked them for those documents that they relied upon to license the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. Totally transparent. Wanted to give it over in 5 minutes. As some of you might have seen in the news, they actually wanted to wait 75 years. And thankfully, the judge ordered it at 55,000 pages per month instead of the 500 pages per month they wanted to do. It should all be produced very soon. We actually went back and sued them again for Moderna's vaccine. And because of their conduct in the first round, I think may have driven the judge this time to order no less than around 180,000 pages per month for the Moderna vaccine. So that's going to be coming out over the next, still take a while. Okay. This is the last, I think, boring bit, so I'll do it super quick, and then I think we're done, almost. Look, when Congress got rid of the market forces that assured vaccine safety, it passed this one statutory provision. It's called the Mandate for Safer Childhood Vaccine. This one section of law that you see on the screen is literally the underpinning of vaccine safety in this whole country, because it is what directs the Secretary of HHS to assure vaccine safety. Section 1, it's got 3 simple parts, A, B, and C. A says, hey, Secretary of HHS, it's your duty now. You sit in the shoes of pharma, and you make these vaccines safer in every possible way. Read that list. It's long, and it's small. And it includes manufacturing, processing, testing, labeling, warning, use, goes on and on and on. Our federal government's responsible for making these things safer. No longer the pharma companies. Okay. Congress said, fine, here's what I want. Here's what we want. Section B, we want a task force made up of the head of the NIH, FDA, and CDC to make recommendations to the head of the HHS on how to make them safer. Provide recommendations. So when we started back in 2016 with ICANN, we said, oh, great, let's see what those recommendations were. So we FOIA'd, we had to fight for it, we had to go to court. We finally got them. One time they made recommendations in one report back in the 90s, and then they disbanded the task force. There's nothing in here about disbanding the task force. That's supposed to be an ongoing task force. It just doesn't exist, period. Section C, every 2 years, the Secretary of HHS is supposed to provide a biannual report to Congress. Every 2 years, detailing how they made vaccines safer, presumably based on the task force recommendations, which they never got. Guess what? You know how many times they've submitted that report? 0. We sued them years ago with my co-counsel, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We sued them for that. They had none. So we decided to go back. It's been a good number of years since that suit that we brought. So we went back again recently. We said, all right, have you done it? It's been 5 years. That's at least 2 cycles. Still no report. So think about it. Task force recommendations and a biannual report, that's the easy part. That's the easy part of the mandate for safer child vaccines. They're not doing the easy stuff. You think they're doing the hard stuff? I think we know already from watching what they did with autism and the clinical trials. Oh, I actually have the proof here too. Here, couldn't locate and so forth. All right. Why is HHS abandoned safety? I think everybody should have gotten at this point. They're responsible for promoting vaccines. They're responsible for defending vaccines against any claimed vaccine court. And it's a revolving door with pharmaceutical companies. that brings us to the very end of this. And maybe we'll bring this all the way back to Minnesota, okay? This is my pinned tweet. Mandates are the tool of bullies, criminals, and dictators. If a patient refuses a medical product after being conveyed its benefits and risks, then this is called informed consent. They were informed and did not consent. Mandating over this objection is immoral and illiberal. That's for mandates. We're not even talking about exemptions. I'm talking about mandates. And we already could see for most of the vaccines, there is no basis on to even mandate it because it doesn't even stop transmission, based on their argument for it. So why do they need to mandate? We talked about earlier. They need to mandate it because they can't convince you on the merits. Because the parents who say, okay, I'm going to look at the package insert. Oh, okay, I want to be able to, I can't see the manufacturer. Oh, wait, I want to look at the post. When the parents know, they know what they know. It's hard to unlearn what you know. So they need to mandate over that. They need to coerce and they need to bully. All vaccine mandates are liberal. Exemptions are often last line of defense. We talked earlier about what was the First Amendment, religious freedom intended to protect. People think of it narrowly. We talked about how broad it was. It's a broad right. I'll show you one last clip, and then I have one more slide, and then we're done.
Your work related to vaccines, how many fetuses have been part of that work?
My own personal work, 2.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 41. Okay. Are you familiar with this article, Dr. Plotkin?
Yes.
Okay. Are you listed as an author on this article?
Yes.
This study took place at the Wistar Institute, correct?
Yes.
You were at the Wistar Institute, correct?
Yes.
How many fetuses were used in the study described in this article?
Quite a few.
So this study involved 74 fetuses, correct?
I don't remember exactly how many.
Turn to page 12 of the study.
Yeah, 76.
76.
Mm-hmm.
And these fetuses were all 3 months or older when aborted, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And these were all normally developed fetuses, correct?
Yes.
What organs did you harvest from these fetuses?
Well, I didn't personally harvest any, but a whole range of tissues were harvested by co-workers.
Okay. And these pieces were then cut up into little pieces, right?
Yes.
And they were cultured?
Yes.
Okay. Some of the pieces of the fetuses were pituitary gland that were chopped up into pieces to okay, included the lung of the fetuses?
Yes.
Okay, included the skin?
Yes.
Kidney?
Yes.
Spleen?
Yes.
Heart?
Yes.
And tongue?
I don't recall, but yeah, probably yes.
So I just want to make sure I understand. In your entire career, and this was just one study, so I'm going to ask you again. In your entire career, how many fetuses have you worked with?
Well, I don't remember the exact number, but quite a few when we were studying them originally, before we decided to use them to make vaccines.
Do you have any sense? I mean, this one study had 76. How many other studies did you have that you used aborted fetuses for?
Oh, I don't remember how many.
You're aware? Are you aware that one of the objections to vaccination by the plaintiff in this case is the inclusion of aborted fetal tissue in the development of vaccines and the fact that it's actually part of the ingredients of vaccines?
Yeah, I'm aware of those objections. The Catholic Church has actually issued a document on that which says that individuals who need the vaccines should receive the vaccines regardless of the fact, and that I think it implies that I am the individual who will go to hell because of the use of aborted tissues, which I am glad to do.
Okay. Do you know if the mother is Catholic?
I have no idea.
Okay.
No.
Do you take issue with religious beliefs?
Yes.
You have said that, quote, vaccination is always under attack by religious zealots who believe that the will of God includes death and disease.
Yes.
You stand by that statement?
I absolutely do.
Okay. Are you an atheist?
Yes.
So some people do have a religious objection to participating in those type of activities, and I understand that in this state, they're looking to potentially make it so that you can't object if you don't want to participate, including receiving injections of his product that he developed, the rubella vaccine, which has millions of pieces, cellular and DNA debris from the aborted fetal cell line in every single dose. The rubella vaccine, part of the MMR, measles, mumps, rubella. Varicella vaccine has billions of pieces of cellular and DNA debris from the aborted fetal cell line in every single injection. So what can you do? We're at the last slide. Here's what I recommend. I recommend that everyone in this room schedule a meeting with your state and federal reps, and you share with them the info about the products discussed today. If nothing else, just show them that the polio vaccine doesn't prevent infection transmission. Just show them the CDC and the FDA material showing them most of these vaccines, forget exemption, shouldn't be mandated. It's a personal choice. They're personal protection. No different than asthma inhalers, exercise, or statins, which kill 700,000 Americans a year. We don't mandate those because it's illiberal to do so, and it's illiberal and rights crushing to mandate them, let alone get rid of any exemptions for them based on convictions, personal belief, or otherwise. And really, it should just come down to informed consent. Inform you of the risks and benefits, and after they've done that, if you don't consent, that should be the end of it. That is what they provide in the first part, very first sentence, section of the Nuremberg Code, from one of the darkest periods of our history, where we learn that when you engage in experimentation, you need the consent of the subject. Vaccines are an experiment. They're an experiment because they've never properly clinical trialed. They don't have proper post-licensure safety. And even if they had those, they should never override somebody's consent, their choice about whether or not they should engage in a medical product or procedure. So I suspect that the groups who are throwing this event today are going to send you lots of emails reminding you to, and sending you lists of who your reps are and chasing you down. So I hope I didn't create homework as well. And thank you all for having me. Okay.